The cloud is really game-changing. It's not the answer to every problem, but it certainly is a solution to many of the problems. And within the CIO community, we're creating the foundation that our missions can then build on. So we're trying to make it easier for our missions to be able to leverage those capabilities. And many of them are actively pursuing the cloud as they look to their future solutions.
We have a buy-first approach. We have a cloud-first approach. Doesn't mean everything's going to go in the cloud, but we look there first. And we use the most cutting-edge tools that we can. We'll get our developers what they need to develop in the cloud and develop around these new agile practices. And they do use these tools.
How do we scale the agency? And if we're going to scale the agency, we need to do several things. First of all, we need a cloud-forward strategy. That's not cloud only, but recognizes that we need to be able to utilize the cloud in a way that ensures security, ensures efficiency, it ensures financial responsibility, and it ensures that we can leverage the cloud in modern ways for data management and data efficiency across the agency.
We've got some enormous data sets. In the top med program, for instance, almost 3 petabytes of data. And the only way you can work with that data is in the cloud. And so Biodata Catalyst is the tool that we're using to make it available and really accelerate efficient biomedical research that can drive discovery and scientific advancements. And in the end, lead into novel diagnostic tools, therapeutics, and prevention strategies for heart, lung, blood, and sleep disorders.
I think the barrier to using all of these might be our figuring out a solution to keeping data secure and allowing it to go only to people who deserve it or who should be accessing it.
Hello and welcome to our Cloud Virtual Summit. My name is Michael Hoffman. I'm the president of Government CIO Media and Research, the leading solutions resource for federal IT. Cloud and IT infrastructure in general have been a leading topics throughout federal IT and a key decision point for many of the leading executives at agencies across government. Our editorial team has been able to interview many of these folks. And what we wanted to do this morning is bring them together and give them a chance to talk about some of the trends that they're seeing, as well as some of the solutions to the challenges that exist in this space. So we're really excited to have everybody join us this morning and have many of these folks join our panels. Some of the topics that we're going to cover today on these panels include security, multi-cloud environment, as well as ATO streamlining. And we're extremely honored and lucky to have Federal Deputy CIO Maria Roat join us this morning and kick us off with a keynote. Before we get started though, what I wanted to do was make sure that we thank our industry partners, Dell Technologies, Zscaler, ServiceNow, and Cognosante. Thank you so much for your support. Without your support, this morning would not be possible. For those watching at home, we want to make sure that you are also following on social media. So please use the hashtag #DigitalCIO. Also, if you have any questions, please use the underneath the video player is a box where you can fill out questions. Our editors are going to go through those questions and can provide them to the moderators. So you might have some of your questions asked during the event this morning. And with that, let's kick things off. I'm going to hand it off to Amy Kluber, our managing editor, who's going to be leading the discussion this morning with Maria. So Amy, take it away.
Great. Thanks, Mike. And good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to welcome Maria Roat. Thanks for the introduction. So Maria, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks, Amy.
Among your office's many efforts, the cloud is a major player in federal IT modernization. There's the Cloud Smart strategy and, of course, the partnerships your office has across government. So I'm looking forward to hearing some of your perspectives on some of these things. As we know, it's been about 6 months now since you were appointed in this role, and then you were acting CIO for a little bit. How have these initial first 6 months been for you, considering the timing of your appointment during this pandemic?
Wow, you said 6 months, and I'm thinking, wow, has it been 6 months? Time flies.
It does.
Yeah, no, it's been great being here at OMB. I think part of this is, learning how the sausage is made, right? At OMB around policy and the budget and all of that. And I knew a lot of it coming in, but now I really get to see how the sausage is made. And I think one of the things that you know, and the team jokes with me a lot, because I'm like, I asked about something. I said, we met on that 2 months ago. Why is this taking so long? And they just laugh at me, and because I'm not used to operating like that. I tend to move pretty quickly, and so it's a little bit that's been a little bit of an interesting journey for me on, you know, the pace of how things operate and run that I'm not used to. I'm used to moving pretty quickly, but it's been great. You know, again, learning how even more so about, you know, the operations and really getting into the details. It's, you know, certainly the CIO Council has been tremendous. I know all the, you know, the CIOs even before coming into this job, and they've been just hugely supportive. So a shout out to the council.
Great. Awesome to hear. And especially, you know, good to hear that the government is kind of keeping up with your fast pace. That's always a plus. So, you know, going into some of the cloud strategies, how are you seeing agencies benefiting from cloud right now? And how can that tool sustain some of the long-term modernization strategies that agencies are thinking about right now?
Yeah, so really, you know, the federal government went from cloud, you know, cloud first to cloud smart around its policies, and really laying the foundation. So, you know, even when the pandemic hit, the agencies were able to really spin up. You know, they were already deploying these cloud-based capabilities, and they were very fast in implementing the COVID-19 response actions, right? So even while we were transitioning to telework, all the things that were happening. And I think that, you know, benefiting from the cloud is really about, you know, allowing that scalability that happened. You know, and even it was websites, for instance, right? The president sent out a tweet, and next thing you know, an agency got hit with, you know, in 800+% increases. Think about that. And it was kind of a beautiful thing to watch when you watch the cloud and you watch everything spin up, and then the number of hits went right back down again, and able to watch that. And that's how the federal government was able to scale and use technology. And this is really helping to drive, you know, to your question, and that long-term modernization. You know, and it's really helping in the long run, right? It's supporting the missions and the government's continuity, right? And the cloud really sustaining that long-term modernization strategy. I mean, we already said cloud smart, right? We are moving as a federal government, taking advantage of cloud. So even as you're modernizing your systems, moving to the cloud, using SaaS solutions, maybe not building from the ground up, sitting there coding, building out using microservices and containers so that you can very quickly modernize pieces and parts, if you will, or reuse capabilities when you're talking about microservices. And I think this is where the cloud comes in and allows you to do just that. And it really gives you a lot of benefits. But the IT, you know, modernization has to be sustained across the federal government. It is not a one and done, and it has to be continuous. And this is where things like the MGT Act really helped out. You know, the IT working capital funds, you know, as agencies can get those approved, you know, through Congress and appropriations and all that, will really help sustain those long-term modernization initiatives that take advantage of the cloud. And as they're moving from on-prem, allow for scalability, just like we saw in the pandemic.
You know, scaling cloud, that's always going to be kind of a topic of focus, especially as it's becoming ever so prevalent across agencies. But it can also present challenges, you know, in and of itself. So what are some ways that agencies can best leverage it at scale? And can you go into some of what those challenges are that you are hearing?
Well, so challenges equal opportunities, right? You know, and throughout the pandemic, right? So the agencies had, in some instances, you know, some capabilities in place or some pilot activities for, you know, digital services, mobile services. And with the pandemic and how fast things accelerated, things that they had planned for later in the year, they shifted to the left, and they were able to execute very fast and very quickly because bureaucracy got out of the way, right? So I think that comes to one of the opportunities is sustaining the momentum. And we talked about that a minute ago, right? How do you sustain the momentum for long-term modernization? We were able to do this earlier this year. We were able to move very fast and got the bureaucracy out of the way. But how do we continue to do that? And I think that's critical because, you know, modernization is not one and done. Moving to the cloud, we're going to move to the cloud. But how do you continue to take advantage of the evolving technologies? You know, I saw firsthand where agencies had roadmaps in place, they had agile process in place, and they drew on all of those capabilities to really grow and use those microservices to really build out new services and meet the new mission requirements of the pandemic. And I think we're going to continue to see that because as we're continuing to move, right, it's digital first, right? You build for digital. This is the environment we're in. And we have to continue to do that. And how do we move faster? Again, the pandemic highlighted how fast we can move. We need to sustain that momentum, and we have to continue to drive innovation. You saw a lot of innovation coming out of the pandemic around technology, you know, and some of it may not be innovation, right? The expansion of virtual desktops in the cloud. That's one example to replace buying hardware, right? So you didn't have to buy hardware. Rolling out virtual desktops so that people can use whatever computers they had. They're in a secure virtual desktop. They're able to connect to resources that they need. And again, the agency doesn't have to go out and buy expensive hardware for new or surge employees. And you can get people ramped up much more quickly. I think automation, agencies took advantage of automation, and there's more that can be done around this to really reduce the time and energy on administrative activities, right? If nothing else, when the entire federal government moved to telework, what happened to the paper, right? And this was a shift. I mean, people might not think about this, but where agencies were wholly dependent on paper and moving paper around, all of a sudden, you know, digital, the requirement for e-signatures has been around for a long time. You know what was really great about the pandemic? It forced electronic signatures. It forced the use of electronic signatures where people said, oh, I can't do that, or I'm not allowed to do this. Guess what? You're sitting at home, you don't have a printer, you can't scan, you can't do any of that, but there's always been the requirement for e-signatures. So I think that was one of the good things that came out of it. And I think, you know, with automation comes machine learning and machine intelligence and, you know, using AI for augmented decisions, really helping our workforce focus on some of the higher value, more complex things. And we're already seeing, you know, tools with AI capabilities already built in, used across the federal government in science, engineering, you know, modeling, simulation. We're seeing all of that already. And really taking advantage of the cloud to really expand on those capabilities and really think about what's in the realm of possible for the federal government as we're taking advantage of cloud and the scalability that it gives us.
The pandemic, definitely, I think it's unlocked a lot across government, you know, as far as why, you know, doing things because that's the way they were always done. Why? It really allowed agencies to take a step back and kind of think through some of their strategies and, you know, implement things that are necessary, not, you know, because it's necessary, not because you can't do it or whatever. So, you know, the pandemic has also driven this need for a cohesive approach to data. And obviously we know the federal data strategy predates the pandemic. Where does the cloud fit into that data strategy? I know you had a huge presence in releasing that and now overseeing it.
Yeah. So when you look at it, you know, with data and then from, you know, technology perspective, so the technology really gives us the ability to, you know, aggregate that data, right? Farm-wide, right? It gives us that ability. And throughout the pandemic, and we're continuing to see this today, the need for horizontal and vertical data sharing through multiple levels of government, right? So from agency to agency, the need to share information, share data, as well as vertically through states and locals to the federal government. Think about, the work HHS was doing, getting information from the states, from, medical treatment facilities, from across the board, and the amount of data that they had to, aggregate, sort through, figure out what was going on with COVID. So there's that vertical as well as the horizontal, and that's going to continue to grow. And I think, our investments in data, right? So we started the federal data strategy a couple years ago, right? And it's really, I think the work around that's been an accelerator for the response, right? Back to the sharing across mission spaces, mission partners, regardless of what that mission space is across the federal government. And there's been some really good, I think, some proof points, across the mission spaces, and how we can use data and technology in new ways and in better ways as we're looking to sharing. There still is a need, I think, for a faster path to maturing data sharing, right? Especially where data is frequently updated, incorporated into decision-making models. How do we leverage the cloud? How do we leverage the technology? You don't want to make copies of data all over the place, right? But how do we access the data where it lives, or if it's in the cloud or wherever it's in, to really help use that data to drive the decision-making? And I think, the interconnectivity of data between systems becomes table stakes, right? The demand for data is going to continue to increase more and more as people say, I need the data before I can make a decision, right? And using APIs to connect cloud-based systems is needed to share the information. And this gets to, improved operations, improved customer experience. And, we need to think through, we can share data, right? But what are those things that are in the way of us sharing data, right? Are there conflicting regulations? Are there conflicting policy, right? The cloud's a great enabler. We can share data, we can put in APIs, and we can do all kinds of stuff with it. But we need to make sure that we're looking at some of the challenges around, are there conflicting regulations around data? Any policy around data usage? Certainly sharing data, right? How do we share data across the federal government, right? We can do it technically. There's no blockers technically, but it really comes around policy and the usage of that data. And really, as we're maturing around our data sharing and how we use data for AI and other technologies, we really need to think through some of those implications around regulations and policy as well. So as we're leveraging data and putting it in the cloud, building out these huge data stores and data lakes, and really building out those capabilities, there's this other aspect of it that I think we need to think through around, like I said, the conflicting regulations or policies, things like that, privacy as well.
Definitely, and the data strategy is a huge undertaking that both the CIO councils and the CDO councils are. Obviously, you have that partnership to tackle that together. Can you discuss how you guys are working together to incorporate some of the cloud strategies amid these ongoing data efforts that you mentioned?
Yeah, we've got some work underway. So the agencies have, the 2020 action plan. So we're in Q4. The agencies have been doing a really good job on the action plans. All of that's publicly posted, so people can see what's going on with it. So the agencies have been doing a good job on the action plan. And what we're working on now is, okay, what's next with the action plan? And how do we continue to mature? There is so much good stuff, and there's really some great pockets of good things happening and how we're seeing data used, right? It's being placed in the cloud, how it's being used, around AI and machine learning. We've got pockets of that, but part of the federal data strategy, one of the key things is really bringing up the entire federal government on its maturity. And we have to keep doing that. And I think the year two, as we get into 2021, the action plans are going to continue bringing everybody up, even while we've got, a lot of very targeted activities and some really good stuff going on in different areas of the federal government. This is going to bring the federal government up as a whole.
Great. So this next question is actually going to be touched on in a subsequent panel later this morning, but I wanted to get your kind of high-level perspective regarding security. We hear it's a twofold approach. There's securing the technology on one hand, and then there's the human element. So we will hear about this later, but from your view, how can capabilities like zero trust, how can they impact cloud strategies, amid these ongoing modernization efforts?
Wow, prior to coming up here to OMB, we were actually rolling out, how we're getting to zero trust, right? Zero trust networking, so that people who are at home can log in and without backhauling all the way through a VPN, through the agency and back out to the internet to get to their cloud, to get to the cloud tools and the tools that they were using, right? And we already have some of that capability rolled out, where people at home, you've got the VPN that's built in behind the scenes and it direct connects you to the cloud, and building those security lanes around that so that people can work faster, right? You want to be more efficient. We're in a digital environment. And I think things like capabilities like zero trust, as we migrate to the cloud, building out that zero trust, what is that path towards a zero trust? And that is through every layer of your stack, right? It's just not one thing, but building in security into everything we're doing, I think, is critically important. And taking advantage of those capabilities really helps our employees and how we serve up the public as well. I know that you guys are going to be touching on this later, but I do want to share, as we're looking at shared services across the federal government, one of the ones that we've talked about the QSMOs, right? The Quality Service Management Office. I think you've heard of those, Amy. There is one around cybersecurity. With part of that is looking at shared services around cybersecurity, right? How do you have SOC, Security Operations Center services, right? Vulnerability management, DNS resolver services. These are some of the things that get rolled out next year, but making sure that the level of standards and the services are being met on those capabilities and that it's consistent. So that's one of the roles of the cybersecurity QSMO, is to really make sure that there's a level set on that. And I think, not only across the federal government is it about the tools and technologies, right? Taking advantage of cloud, its capabilities. There's some amazing security tools out there with AI built in that really help our CISOs and our security, our security officers out there. But we need to make sure also that we've got the right people who understand the capabilities, that understand the cloud, understand security in a cloud environment, right? So whether it's around, spinning up servers in the cloud, spinning up VMs, whatever you're doing, that work that you understand, even in the application development, if you're in that, where security fits in there. And I think we have to continue to focus on the skill sets that have to have that visibility into the network and efficient operations just throughout the entire stack of what's being operated at the agencies. And at the agencies, centralizing those incident response activities is really important. And there's been a lot of really, really good work around that. And even as we're moving to the cloud and security and, digital first, right? And our customers expect that delivery to be quick, easy, secure, right? That's one of those things our customers expect. And really understanding the cloud capabilities and how you secure things all throughout the stack really gets to making sure that our customers can trust us from a security perspective. And I think the pandemic highlighted all the really good work that it's gone on for the last several years and the capabilities the government's got in place to really securely meet the needs of the American public. And I think we showed that.
Great and fantastic to hear. And speaking of next year, how do you see, you mentioned this earlier already in a few points, but how do you see 2021 really shaping up as far as the ongoing data efforts and, of course, cloud first strategies et cetera? How do you see the pandemic maybe impacting that?
Really good. I mentioned that a lot of the barriers got out of the way, right? Some of the bureaucracy and things like that. And I want to see that continue in 21. I really want to see the modernization, that sustained long-term modernization. I want to see all of those kind of things continue, as well as, from the federal data strategy, I mentioned the next year's action plans. We have a CDO council now. And, the chairs, and they started meeting, and there's a lot of really good stuff going on. The data community has always been pretty well connected. And by standing up the CDO council, it's just been amazing how they're coming together and working together. And I think we'll see with the action plans for 2021, I think we're going to see even more, just some big steps around data and maturity across the federal government.
Fantastic. Well, we are out of time, but Maria, thank you so much for joining us. Great perspectives. And I will introduce now our next panel, led by my colleague, Fernanda Manzano.
Thanks, Amy.
Thanks again, Maria.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you. All right, so joining me for our discussion today, I have John Short, EHRM Chief Technology Integration Officer at the Department of Veterans Affairs, Nick Weber, Program Manager for Cloud Services for Research at the National Institute for Health, Chris Nichols, Program Manager and Chief of the Enterprise Intelligence and Data Solutions at Defense Health Agency, and last but certainly not least, Jonathan Album, Federal CTO and Principal Digital Strategist at ServiceNow. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
All right, so to start out today, I want to start with the high-level focus of things. Each of your agencies has developed strategic plans and goals centered around IT modernization, some specifically calling out the use of the cloud and others mentioning it as a viable option. Since those plans have been put out, you've all made great strides in realizing some of those goals. So what are the significant accomplishments you've made to date in each of your respective organizations in your move towards the cloud? Who wants to kick us off?
I can go. This is Nick, because I think you maybe teed up a little bit the program name and making great strides. So we have a program at the National Institutes of Health called the Science and Technology Research Infrastructure for Discovery, Experimentation, and Sustainability, otherwise known as STRIDES. And what we're trying to do is kind of make progress, make strides in getting our researchers at NIH and those that we fund across the country. NIH is a funding agency, funds about 300,000 investigators at 2,700 institutes and medical and academic research institutes across the country. And we've partnered with commercial cloud service providers to be able to bring to bear the tools, the technologies, the capabilities to our researchers to accelerate their speed to science. And that's been a program that we've launched about 2 years ago now. We have partners with AWS and Google Cloud in discussions with Microsoft and other cloud service providers as well to bring these technologies to bear and have seen great success over the last couple of years. About 350 research programs have enrolled in STRIDES. We've trained nearly 3,000 people. We've had about $10 million based on the cost, the negotiated price ranges that we have with our cloud service providers and cost savings to our participants, and a lot of great research capabilities and new innovations and discoveries potential for our research community. So that's been a major part of NIH's strategic plan for data science, to really bring these tools and technologies to bear to scientific research and to combat things that we're dealing with every day with COVID and the pandemic and with many other health afflictions that many of us or our loved ones are struggling with. So we're excited about the program that we have at NIH.
That is exciting. John, Chris, anything from you guys?
John, you want to go ahead?
John Short, let me comment. As you know, VA's moving forward with a new clinical electronic health record, the same one that DoD started rolling out prior to our initiation into it. As part of our work, what we've done is we looked at wherever Cerner has the capability for their own internal Millennium Cloud services, we're utilizing those for almost all of our components. In addition to that, Cerner has announced publicly that they have a partnership with AWS, Amazon Web Services. And so we're looking more and more at using that platform as well. We have a lot of integrations we did when we went to Grandstaff, our first hospital site. And majority of the interfaces that we had that weren't inside the Cerner Enclave, a good majority of those we actually put into AWS and or the Azure Microsoft Cloud, the VA Enterprise Cloud that OIT had set up. We put them there for resiliency, for expandability, and for flexibility. So it's worked out very, very well. We continue to look at that with Cerner and how we can best move to that. We also moved VA's historical data, 38 years of medical records, into Cerner's Healthy Intent platform, big data platform, population health analytics, which has given us a lot of flexibility of what we do going forward, especially if we look at using more cloud platforms. Over.
So on the DoD front, on the military health front, so we really started this path about 2.5 years ago, and actually increased our time because of some things this year I'll explain. But it was brought in about 2.5 years ago to really aggregate all our data together because it was all disparate everywhere around the organization, right? Not just health data, but many other data sources. So we really set up a secondary data PMO, and that's what I manage now. Really focus around efficiency with data, efficiency, speed, trust, intelligence, and enabling that user experience. And the cloud piece is a piece of that, right? And so for the last 2.5 years, we've consolidated about 22 warehouses and re-platformed about 14 applications into what now we're calling the MHS information platform. And due to various reasons, we are on an 18-month plan to move everything to AWS GovCloud. We enhanced that timeline starting in late February, early March. Yes, it just happens to be the same time as COVID, but it had nothing to do with that. That just became a doubling effect, right? Because of data needs. But in about a 16, 17-week period, we moved everything from an on-prem data center into AWS GovCloud, which meant a lot of work by the team and a lot of effort to get there. The big part of that is now spending the last 4 months since then to really smooth out the edges, really working on role-based access around everything, focusing on our compute and store, which is critical. We're not smart about things, and this goes with cloud across the board. We've decreased our cloud costs over the first month. We've actually dropped it in half because we figured out how to manage, starting to figure out how to manage things the right way. Focusing on data management, operating instructions now, versioning, platform efficiencies as a whole, because as I keep on telling the team, the amount of work to us is not decrease, it's going to increase, right? And so we need to get as efficient now, so then we have that buffer so we know how to manage this accordingly from a cost and performance perspective. So that's kind of where we've gone and come to in the last couple, and then now the focus is what's next.
If I can just jump in, I think.
Please go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think one of the very interesting, themes, across the three stories is the importance of data and making sure that the data is stored well and that there are ways to access the data that are easy. And cloud's a great tool to be able to support that. I love the idea of being able to consolidate warehouses and create more access to data. But if we're going to do these cloud migrations, and I did a lot of cloud migrations when I worked in the government, we have to be thinking not just about where the data is and what it is, but once it gets into the cloud, how do people have access to it? How do they request access? How are they able to trust that the data that they have is the right data? So there's a lot of additional planning and thinking, I think, that, is behind these stories that is really important for people to understand. It's not as simple as just buying an AWS or Azure instance or a platform technology. You really have to be thoughtful about what you're trying to accomplish and how you'll operate in the future.
No, Jonathan, on that, I absolutely agree, right? I mean, it should be technology last. It's really about the people in the process. And if we don't get that right, we should never be inserting a piece of technology at all. Because inserting a piece of technology into something does not fix the underlying problems or issues that are occurring. And we have to focus on those processes and people and how to manage that capability the right way.
Yeah, I'd like to tell what Jonathan said just briefly, and that is we're dealing with health IT in my realm and a lot of other people's realms here. And people can say data is data, but health data is very more unique You have to be much more careful with it. If you get a bad transaction and you're missing $1, that's one thing. If you have a bad transaction and your medication doesn't arrive or wrong one comes there, that's a worse problem for that individual. So you got to be critical with health data. One of the things we did when we moved the 38 years of data from VA to Cerner, we actually cleaned up the data more with clinical informaticists, medical doctors and their staff to going through it, making sure the coding was correct for different national standards, Loink, RX norms, SNOMED, and also where there was errors in the data, they were able to clean those up. And then they were able to take those that they did to clean that data with tools that they did and provide that back to the legacy side to say, here's the areas we cleaned up. Now you can go back and clean up the legacy data as well in the current systems. So I think that's one of the critical things. Anyone can just move a chunk of data. I mean, that's easy to do. But to do it secure and to clean up the data and then make it effective when you get it there and not overspend on your infrastructure, that takes work. Over.
Right. So I think you guys bring up great points, and I think we're getting into our next question a little bit on, the long-term benefits that you want to realize, right? So I think you touched on a lot of those. So on your way there, what are some of the challenges that you faced along the way, right?
Go again. So yeah, I think one of the major challenges was also an opportunity for our broad biomedical research community that NIH supports is around training, and that's both for kind of the IT staff, the people building and supporting the infrastructure. That's for our researchers who are trying to use these tools and understand a new way to work with tools and data and share data and collaborate. And also people who liaise between them, which we found to be a very important capability. People who know both the research side, the IT side, and can help to make sure that our business users, who are generally research scientists, have the support and understanding and don't have to worry or care so much about some of the underlying fundamental IT components, the networking, the identities, the other pieces. We need to make sure we get that right so that their jobs are easy and they can focus on their science. So I think building a workforce that understands this new way of working, that understands their different roles and responsibilities, especially when the cloud gives you so many tools at your fingertips, it's overwhelming sometimes. So to really be able to have a robust training program in conjunction with the work that you're doing technically to move to the cloud has been one of our biggest challenges and one of our biggest opportunities. And we've invested very heavily in kind of that training component to build, to earlier points, those people skills around this so that the technology that we're bringing to bear can actually be leveraged properly.
So I think those are, Nick, those are really good points. And it's not just people with the right skills to interact with the new applications. I think it's also people with skills who can think creatively about, well, what should the process be now once we get out of some legacy systems and we can rethink and maybe redesign how we do our work or how we access the data. I think John said it really well. It's not just picking up a chunk of data and moving it. Anybody can do that, but to do it and get value out of it because you maybe rethought the way the workflow exists or you cleaned up the data. I mean, I think that's really the magic, and to the extent that you can get people's minds around the idea that there is new technology that can help us, but we also can reinvent the process. I think kind of, as Chris was saying, it's people and process first. That's important. And too often I've seen that cloud just is a technology idea, but it's part of maybe an organization's digital transformation, you could say. And that's a team sport, right? That's a whole of the agency endeavor, and you really need leadership from the top down to buy into it. So that, if you're talking about what are the challenges, it's getting leadership, I think, to see that the digital transformation you guys are talking about requires everyone to be involved. And once you get that, I think you can accomplish a lot.
So I think, go ahead,
as
John.
part of the focus of the value of that data, one of the things we had going up to the Go Live event we had at Mayan Grandstaff Spokane a month ago, we said we're going to move all the data into one platform. You'll have access to all the data into what's called a healthy intent platform for Cerner, and it'll trigger clinical decision support, reminders, that sort of thing. But then we're going to move a subset of that the clinicians said that they want to see in the EHR itself for transactional day-to-day activities. And so but a month before we went live, so 2 months ago, some people said, well, maybe we should go put more data in there. And the clinicians already looked through and already determined what they wanted in there. But some people were saying, maybe we need more, maybe we need more. Day before we went live, maybe we need to put more data in there. And we were live for 3 days, and people said, maybe we should relook, and we said we wanted X in there, but maybe we need only part of X. So as soon as they saw how much data, even only the 3 years, they only wanted to see 3 years of other past transactions in the common EHR. Once they saw it, they said, for these couple of areas, maybe we want to see a little bit less. And so that we're still, learning that. We're getting their feedback, determine what that right piece is. We want to give them everything they need to operate, but not so much that they can't see anything, right? Because then they can't get their work done. So that's that blend of make it agile enough where you have that right data at the right place, at the right time. Just kind of like, Steve Jobs, it just works, right? You want the technology to disappear and people to be able to do their job better. And so we have all the data on one platform. They can always go do research on it, look at a long-term item, they can see all that. But for their day-to-day stuff to be efficient and to be able to treat the patient the way they like, we have to fine-tune that. We got really close to where we need to be. Most of them are happy with that, and we're still looking at different pieces of that data to see should it be modified. But I think that's one of the key is refining that so you make sure it's most effective and not just hand it off and say, okay, we did something and you better use it. We need to make sure that the customer has what they really need to where they almost forget all of our names. When the functional people are forgetting who we are, we've done our job well because it just works. Over.
So Fernando, you asked about challenges with cloud transition and utilization of cloud. I would actually say the opportunities as well, right? Pure and simple, just like Nick is in the with NIH and the VA as well, right? We're all large research institutions and organizations, right? And simply put, the compute capabilities as we move into the cloud space, because we're still learning when in the data space, right? We're still learning, and the value of data is aggregating it all together and starting to build the ability to start to the deep learning aspect of things and from insights and everything. And so you can't do that without the right compute capability. So that to me is the core. And then from that, it really is about, the ability to integrate all those disparate data sources I was just discussing, right? We're looking down the path more, I'm a data guy, I'm an informaticist, but I'm actually a clinician by background. And so what I'm thinking about is how do we get to the right things? And it's not all clinical data that we need, right? It's purchase care data, it's billing data, as well as staffing data and all these other things, because that gives us the ability to start to really look at how we manage. But those are the things that we're going down this technology path around implementing and modernizing and stabilizing our cloud maneuvers, but then it's really about, in a parallel path, starting with the new domains about bringing in genomics data for precision medicine, social determinant data, device data, biomedical device data being take home as well as our personal device, but also biomedical device, right, in the facilities. In my space, operational medicine. That's another space that I'm looking at, and how do I bring that in? Because that will help drive things as well. And then in my space too, legacy. As we're looking in the legacy space, I'm accountable to shut down those systems and bring in all that data into our platform, and then transfer that and integrate that with what we have with MHS Genesis on the future state EHR side. But how do we integrate all those things together? And that's the stuff that we have to do in a parallel path, as well as, and that's really becoming a learning health system in our space. Over.
Okay, great. Yeah, and you touched about on the learning and the ability to really leverage those benefits and realize those opportunities, right? And that relies heavily on partnering with cloud service providers as well, right? Bringing in their knowledge and everything that they bring to the table as well, which is a bit of a different model than we're used to in the government space. So what are some of the considerations made in deciding to partner with industry?
I can go again if we're going with the same order. Yeah. So we've had incredible I can't say enough about how strong our partnerships with the commercial cloud providers and others that they bring to bear, distributors, resellers, et cetera, to making this work. And we've been able to come up with win-win scenarios. I think in the past, we might look at these as kind of vendor relationships and kind of one way, and these need to be very two-way, very, kind of open. We bring professional services folks in all the time through dedicated engagements and ad hoc to really understand how can we start to, kind of position ourselves and position our teams internally to extend our data center out to the cloud and do it in ways that are, kind of under best practices and that they've supported many other organizations in doing. So, we've found that they have so much, kind of knowledge and insight and interest. One of the things that, comes through very clearly is, I think, we look at the mission first, and we look at the objectives, and we look at what we can do, together to, make new discoveries and build new capabilities and figure out interesting ways, the art of the possible, like Jonathan was talking about, for using these tools for making new discoveries. And that excites everyone on the team, whether it's somebody on the NIH side or somebody from the cloud service provider side. And when you're kind of sitting on the same side of the table trying to figure out the best solutions, how can we do this? This is exciting. You get this momentum and snowball effect that, again, is very different than what I've experienced. And what you mentioned, government relationships typically are is very, kind of one-way contractual, do this for us by this time. When we're looking at it, more collaboratively, we're able to get so much more done, in my experience. So it's been a great relationship with our CSP partners.
John?
To tag on to that, I would just say, there's no one in the federal sector, honestly, let alone the private sector, can do this themselves, right? And do all this themselves. And so it is absolutely a partnership, as Nick was saying. And it's really about, as Nick was already saying, finding the right industry partners, having, as well as having inward honest conversations inside the team and inside the organization on what is needed and what is necessary, not being caught up with everything that's coming down the pike, and really looking at it from a strategic perspective and a planning perspective, and how you incrementally put the right capabilities in at the right time. And that also helps foster those relationships with your industry partners.
John, anything from you?
Nothing additional on that. Thank you.
Yeah, I would just, from my perspective, having worked in government for a long time and then having moved into industry, I think oftentimes, industry sometimes needs help to understand the mission and what you're trying to accomplish, and get away from the idea that you're buying technology because you like technology. You're buying technology because you're trying to help a veteran. You're buying technology because you're doing cancer research. You're buying technology because there is a mission behind that. And I tried to do this when I worked at USDA, and I think it worked pretty well. And I don't know that it always happens, but let's connect this purchase and let's connect this cloud service we're buying here with the citizen, with the researcher, with the patient. And I think when you make that connection, you create really good engagement. And some of the conversations become less about the contract and more about the outcome in a really meaningful way. So I just offer that as advice, something I've seen on sort of both sides of the fence here.
Thanks, Jonathan. And what about from a technical solution perspective? Are you approaching these massive technical challenges in a different way than you have previously?
Well, we've talked a lot about data, and we've talked a lot about, the need for integration. And, one of the things that I've worked on since I joined ServiceNow is really the ability to leverage the data in these sometimes legacy systems, or maybe a system of record, and using, workflow technology to use that data, leverage it via workflow to get to an outcome, to get to an answer, or to complete a service for somebody, and trying to automate those things as much as possible. Too often, the complexity that's sort of grown up in our environments over time, requires somebody to go to multiple systems to get an answer. It does sound like there's people are thinking about how do we integrate this data. And I think integrating is one thing, and then, leveraging it through workflow to drive to mission outcomes as quickly as possible, and making it simple for people to get the service that they need, whether it's a patient or it's a researcher or what have you. That's what makes the difference. And I think as John was saying, that then we just disappear as providers, and the functional people can do their thing, and ideally do it a lot more efficiently, because what they need is at their fingertips, and they can get to it through a mobile device, or they can get through it online, or using the tools they're most comfortable with. Let's minimize the change they have to go through.
Let me dovetail. Right. Just add one thing, that is, and I looked at some of my readings on Elon Musk. He talks about it a lot, and that's de-engineering. We often go to these complex things that they work, but we need to take the next step to de-engineer that solution and make it less complex. When we make it less complex, we lower the cost, and we also lower the risk for the user. We lower the risk for ourselves to maintain it, and we usually lower the overall complexity everywhere else. And so it's easier to integrate to that thing in the future, easier to migrate to something in the future. So we constantly need to rapidly find a good solution and then spend the time de-engineering that solution, instead of what we typically do in government and sometimes large contractors, is take a long time to develop a big solution. We shouldn't do that. Rapidly come up with a solution, even if it's ugly, and then de-engineer it, and then it will reveal itself to a more flatter and less complex solution that'll work for everybody. That's what helped us be successful in OHRM the last few years and going live and with a ton of integration, but we made those integrations less complex with the same functionality. I'm not saying strip out functionality and give people nothing. You can give them all the capabilities, but do it in a way that's less complex that benefits all of us. And the cloud can help you do that. Again, if you do the rapid prototyping first and then de-engineer that solution to make it, again, flatter. Thank you.
Right. Okay, so continuing on with the partnering theme, since each of your agencies is trusting external commercial organizations with sensitive government information and data, we'd almost be remiss not to cover the topic of cybersecurity, right? So can you tell me a little about the cybersecurity measures you've taken to prevent data breaches while also maintaining data integrity that we've covered a lot today in your transition to more mature platforms like the cloud?
Sure. So we've kind of really worked with the partners as well to kind of follow the shared responsibility model and then build a set of shared services for our customers. So it's really about kind of collaborating and making sure everyone is clear on what the technology capabilities are. It's well documented. We go through the process, FISMA and Fedramp related processes for inheriting cybersecurity controls from the cloud service provider. The things that we build at NIH on our platforms, we tend to focus on kind of providing a set of services to our customers around secure high-speed network connectivity and identity and access and those sort of pieces. And then we allow for our customers to kind of inherit all of that kind of common cybersecurity baseline and build from that for the systems and solutions that they're building on our platforms. And we've seen a lot of just transparency internally around that process, around the controls, around how we've implemented things, partnerships with different groups, our security operations center, our incident management and vulnerability management teams, et cetera, to really make sure they know what their roles and responsibilities are. We've tabletop exercises to understand how we can respond to an incident. We've had incidents before where, incidentally somebody's access keys get posted to a public GitHub repository, and your cloud spend is going up over the weekend, and addressing those and building in process improvements to make sure that we're scanning for those sort of things and that doesn't happen in the future are all important. So kind of taking a retrospective look at things as they happen and build that into kind of the way that we harden in the continuous diagnostics and monitoring that we do for our system. So it's definitely critical. To your point, from a public perspective, you're trusting these companies with all this data. What do you mean? But also on the contract side, making sure that it's very explicit, that we are the owners of the data. We're using the technology services. We're not, granting, technology companies access to do whatever they please with, sensitive health information. And being clear about that with, kind of the public is also very important, so there aren't any misconceptions.
So I think, from obviously in the DoD, we probably have some of the strictest cybersecurity aspects of things. On top of that, you layer in our my space the necessity from a PII, PHI perspective as well, right? And so it's absolutely difficult, but I think what we have found with us doing this transition this year, it's given us the ability to really focus on continuous monitoring, right? And actually make that a part of the way we do business. And so it's allowed us in that cyberspace to change our processes, make some real decisions around, from a technical perspective, isolating segments of our environment based upon our ATOs. I mean, we did 4 ATOs for a reason. We did a data logic presentation layer different within the same capability for that reason. So we kind of have some of that modularity of things so we can manage it better. And it's about leveraging approved services that are already out there, right? In our space, if this has already approved something, it's looking at what is already approved so that we can inherit that, increasing that speed to bring the right things in from a cybersecurity perspective. And the team's done an amazing job.
John?
I would say ditto to what the comments already said. Again, some of it's going back to basics, layered defenses. We worked with DoD on a construct where we're inspecting all the medical traffic, especially those Internet of Things, out on the edges, very close to where they're being used. Then they get inspected before they get into the enclave. And so we're doing multiple inspection points. We have DoD and VA both looking at going on. So we have multiple ways we're looking at it. We have multiple inspection points. We're following the standards. The VA's cybersecurity office updated cybersecurity policy to mirror most of DoD's. That meant that we had more robust policies, as well as made it easier to do work with DoD. We've moved to DoD's EMAS to have really good tight control of our cyber artifacts. Having a good artifact doesn't give you cybersecurity, but having those artifacts, doing all the work to get the right artifacts and all the scans and maintaining that will make you to the right posture. So we've done a lot of those things throughout the enterprise. OHRM has done that very tightly and interwoven with DoD and VA together very, very tightly, along with Cerner. Cerner has done a lot of things on their side to really bring up their game, their platforms that they're doing inside their own data center and their Millennium Cloud, as well as their commercial cloud platforms, to also meet those DoD and VA requirements. So we're going to keep pressing that. And then the last thing I'll mention is, as an industry, we need to press those medical device manufacturers, because, it's a medical device. We can't do cybersecurity to break it. We need to get out of that. We need to have them putting that security in the very beginning. And so that way that we can have the right cyber at the Internet of Things instead of having to put probes and monitors all around it to protect the environment. Over.
Absolutely agree with that.
I would just say at ServiceNow, we've invested very heavily in security, not just getting our government community cloud up to a FedRAMP high level, but we've achieved impact level 4 security in the DoD, and we're investing in MedCoy now, and we have a plan to get to impact level 5. So some of that's in our own government community cloud, some of that will be with cloud service provider partners. But there's a recognition that, if we're going to be a critical partner to, agencies in the federal government, we have to up our security game as well. And we've invested significant resources as a company. So I'm very, very proud of that. We recognize how critical, this protection of data and patient data especially is to our business and the government.
Right, that responsibility certainly cannot be taken lightly, right, Jonathan? So it's very clear that you're taking the steps that you need to meet or exceed expectations.
Right.
That's great to hear. All right, so we're almost near our time together. So I'd like to switch our focus a little bit and hear from you about what you foresee in the next 3 to 5 years in the government healthcare space as you look to leverage, all of the efficiencies, all of the benefits that we just spoke about in your move towards the cloud.
So I'll take this one first. So I think our next year is our last big year of being foundational. As I said, 2.5 years of consolidating, rationalizing, right? Advancing our timelines around cloud and moving to the cloud work. And so our next big year is really that last foundational where we're focused on migrating our last big component of a warehouse called MDR into the MIP. And then really focusing also around data management and automated data mapping with some tools, data pipeline automation, and then finalizing our legacy data prototype work. And as I was discussing earlier, but then in parallel path, it's really about the so what. That's all great technology things, but it's really then about putting that innovation pipeline in, and then working with our broad swath of this very large organization worldwide around the work that they need done. And going back to something Jonathan said earlier about prioritization and getting senior leadership buy-in. That's been a big piece of what I've been focused on, and getting those right types of boards put in place so we can get prioritization, but then also working as we identify what work needs to be done and what tools need to be there for our functional community. Most of our MTS are already solving these problems on their own because we haven't solved them, right? So it's working with them to find and harnessing the innovation that's out there everywhere, and then bringing it into the enterprise platforms and then scaling it in a timely manner. Otherwise, they're going to be doing this. They're going to have to solve their problems at their local facilities, and then it's really then also tying in the research in that space, getting to a point of having, the right abilities to have clinicians come in and get access to the data they need in a timely manner, so they stop doing pencil stubby analysis, and we can actually speed to market the research, and in partnerships with people like Nick and others out there, partner at the federal level and start building towards that true federal data hub in the federal cloud space, so we can drive change in this organization, in the world.
I can go next. So for the next 3 to 5 years, I'll echo a lot of that. I think we're looking for much more system and data integration with all our individual research programs that we fund, and then what that means for patients or healthcare in general. So I'll give some examples. So we have obviously clinical trials and vaccine studies related to COVID. We have major cancer programs such as the Cancer Moonshot. We have a large opioid program to address the opioid crisis called HEAL. And we have many of these different types of programs, the BRAIN Initiative. Another one is the All of Us Research Initiative, where we're enrolling 1 million people for personalized health information, genomic information, medical history information. And those programs are all really important and impactful within and among themselves. But I think what we're really trying to do by bringing all of these to the cloud and bringing some standards and bringing some support and resources behind this is to really have questions to be asked across these resources at the point of care with a clinician to look at not only those data resources that have lots of information from previous trials or medical histories or what have you, but also information from the individual's social or geographic or device data on their Fitbits and those sort of things to really inform what can we do specifically for you, knowing all of these things about you in data that are readily accessible and secure and all of those things. But what sort of outcomes can we have for the individual and then for the population at large when we're not looking in silos or individually at how we treat things or at data sets, but we're looking broadly across them and connecting pieces in the clinic and in other ways. So that's what we really are aspiring to. We're seeing some good pairwise connections of, okay, we were able to connect this resources with these medical records, and I think we'll see more of that. All right, and the ecosystem will grow, and the questions that we didn't even know we could ask, let alone answer, I think are going to be really eye-opening and really beneficial to everyone. So I think that's what we're aiming for.
Great. John?
What we're going to see, especially with the Office of Electronic Health Record Modernization, as we roll out across the country, it's going to allow more and more systems to be consolidated and people go down to one platform. We had a nurse at one of the clinics say, I'm so used to opening up 8 different screens, applications to be able to do my job, and now everything's integrated. I'm doing it at one place. We're going to be doing more and more of that as we move along and roll out the rest of the capabilities. That's going to allow the user to spend more time with the veteran and less time with their computer. We all love our computers, but for healthcare, let's spend time with the patient. That means better outcomes. That means more longevity, better quality of life for the veteran. And that means the clinicians, instead of having to figure out how to develop some software with OIT, common software that's commercially available, now they can instead spend that time they have available either with the patient or with specialty applications that are very unique to the veteran population, Agent Orange, et cetera, that may not be a commercial model. And that way, anything that's available, that's commercially available, that we can bring into the cloud platform, bring into the Cerner environment, and roll that out more and more. That'll allow now OIT can focus on those specialty applications, and VHA can focus on that, on those research. Again, better patient outcomes, better quality of life for the veteran, better quality of life for the caregiver, because now they can actually do their job more efficiently. They don't have to come in for 2 days and do research and find all the data so they can treat the patients that week. They can have it readily available. So we're seeing the efficiency for the human and the technology, again, melting it away in the background to allow them to do their job much better. Over.
Yeah, and I think everything that I've heard, makes me even more confident in, in the direction that, these agencies are going. And the idea that all of these different data sets, as they are integrated and brought together, makes it easier for the clinician or others to use. But ultimately, I think the connections to those data, there's a workflow element that's really important, because you have to be able to make the data actionable. Having all these data sets is great, but when you can apply machine learning or AI to them and recognize patterns and then use those patterns and that learning through sort of workflow engine to drive to an outcome that helps the patient, I mean, that's when it's really important. That's when the data is really meaningful, because it drove a decision that helped somebody. And I think that's the future. And the data sets are the gas that drives that engine. And it's a really exciting time. It's part of the big digital transformation we're all undergoing. I think COVID's really accelerated it, especially in the healthcare space. So it's a very exciting time. And I've learned quite a lot today on the panel. So I'm glad that I participated.
Thank you.
Great. And I think these are great thoughts to end on. Thank you, gentlemen, so much for your time and thoughts today. And now I'll pass it over to my colleague, Alex Brown, who's paneling the topic entitled Securing Cloud with Zero Trust. Alex, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Alex Brown. I'm with Government CIO. I'm Senior Vice President here, and I am happy to announce and moderate this particular panel this afternoon. I have with me Mr. Luis Coronado. He is the Director of IT Operations with the DHS. Also joining us is George Duchak, CIO for the Defense Logistics Agency. And from Dell, Mr. David Stickley. He's an executive and manages their strategic programs there. Good afternoon, gentlemen, and thanks for joining.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Great. So let's jump into it. Organizations are increasingly adopting cloud as the platform for their computing and managing some of their assets. With cybersecurity constantly being a theme that we hear, I want to talk a little bit today with you guys about what you're seeing with respect to cybersecurity in the cloud, and specifically the role that zero trust as a concept plays. With that, I'm going to ask Dave to kick us off, and a very specific question for you, Dave. I got to imagine you've seen a lot in your role. What does cloud security look like from a vendor perspective, and how generally should federal agencies and cloud vendors discuss cloud security needs?
Thanks, Alex. I appreciate the time today. Cloud security, wow, and zero trust. A lot of challenges in this world, and I would certainly say the age of COVID has taught us an awful lot about where our previous cybersecurity constructs may or may not be relevant in this age we're living in today. I want to touch on a couple of things if I could right up front before I dive into zero trust, which was your question. Our focus on cloud, I think, has maybe been a little skewed over the years. And I will freely admit that as a previous government executive, I might have been a party to this confusion over cloud as a destination as opposed to an operating model. I mean, we came out with cloud first policies where we were simply pushing our customers to get into the cloud We had a little conversation here before we came on the air about pushing COBOL-based applications into the cloud environment. Not everything operates well in the cloud, and that's just a fact. And so the way we look at cloud as an operating model is honestly the way that most of the industry is operating in the cloud today, in a hybrid mode. And what I'm seeing more so today is, traditionally we talk hybrid between your on-prem solution and a potential public or gov cloud solution. I'm seeing an awful lot of push to the edge today because our applications are starting to process at the edge. And so all of that transformation from a cloud standpoint brings new cybersecurity challenges. Fundamentally, what is zero trust? It is proactively controlling all of the interactions between your people, your data, and your information systems. That's really not new. People, data, information systems. The key word there is proactively. I mean, much of our cybersecurity response in the past has been very reactive. And we need to bring new tools that allow us to be proactive. And so essentially that path to zero trust focuses on device management. I mean, it focuses on access management. It focuses on network, risk management, automation, essentially new ways to deliver technology in each of those key areas. I would tell you, Alex, I think there are 7 essential pillars to zero trust as we look at it. At the user level, all sorts of new ways to authenticate users. And the big cloud providers provide some of that capability. There are new ways to manage our network security. We've been so focused on that perimeter security for so many years. We need to start from a network standpoint, securing more specific, at a more granular level, at the VM level even. Device security, obviously new ways to secure our devices. Commercial solutions for classified, new device trust solutions that industry is offering. Automation and orchestration across the entire spectrum from a cybersecurity standpoint. And the industry is delivering great new tools in that regard. And finally, I got to hit the buzzword bingo and say AI, ML at least once. From an analytics standpoint, the ability to bring those analytics tools to the edge is so important. And I know we have a lot of questions, and I want to give my colleagues time to dive in. But that's my view of zero trust. It's really the same principles we've applied to our on-prem and edge cloud environments. And now we need to figure out how we mature those into a new hybrid cloud world.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. I appreciate that. So George, with Dave said a mouthful, right? He talked about some fundamental tenets. He talked about the cloud being, kind of a journey and not necessarily a destination. How is DLA approaching zero trust and security in the cloud?
Well, we're just beginning that journey. So I'll tell you where we're at right now. We've just undertaken a pretty massive modernization effort to move our ERP systems to the cloud. And part of that is just the lifting and the shifting, and David's spot on with the idea of moving old applications to the cloud, and they'll just behave as old applications in the cloud rather than on-prem. So a good part of the modernization will be to refactor a lot of those applications, try to get the best benefits of the cloud. Secondly, as part of our modernization, we're creating a DLA platform. Rather than looking at individual systems, our users, they'll just be able to look at what capabilities they need to invoke and specific to their job. So as part of the DLA platform, we'll be instantiating personas. If you're a buyer, you only need to do these sorts of things and get to these sorts of applications on the network and get this data. If you're an analyst, you may have a different place of where you need to go on the network. So instantiating personas for the type of roles that you'll be doing is part and parcel to that zero trust journey. So we are continuously assessing who's on what application, where, when, and why. I'm not trusting anybody, basically. A culture of paranoia on the network. Because going to the cloud kind of removes that the old mental model of having this, perimeter defense, the bastions where you knew what was coming in, what was going out. You don't have that anymore. So I think, there's a good symbiosis between zero trust and cloud.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks for that. Luis, I've spent some time in the DHS, and I can't remember a time when it was not at the top of the list of things to ensure that the infrastructure was secure. I want to talk with you a little bit about the types of technologies you all are using with respect to managing the various cloud platforms that you may leverage.
Sure. So we've been actually rolling out different capabilities to address cloud. I mean, we're in multiple different types of cloud. We're both in IaaS and SaaS primarily, a little bit of PaaS. But some of the tools that we've actually started rolling out are we have started leveraging a cloud access security broker. And that cloud access security broker allows us to extend our existing policies that we have on premise into the cloud environments, in addition to also providing us the visibility that we need across the multiple environments, regardless of whether it's an IaaS, a PaaS, or a SaaS. We're also looking into rolling out, and we're piloting right now, a cloud security gateway, which enables for us to be able to access, your cloud services, like again your SaaSes, straight from an endpoint, and still do it securely, and still have that visibility to say, it's being on the network versus being off the network. And this has been very important, obviously, as the current situation with COVID and the usage of VPN has obviously increased across, I think, across everywhere. So the cloud security gateway is another tool that we're leveraging to basically expand usage of cloud securely. In addition, also being able to go back inside of our network and be able to securely access applications, as it has that capability as well. And then lastly, the other thing that we're also piloting right now is actually a security validation platform. And that security validation platform allows us to be able to test our defense in depth for whenever we roll out, if we're going to go from cloud A to cloud B, but then we're starting to look at another cloud environment, figuring out what our actual security looks like from a defense in depth by being able to validate, different scenarios of when something is occurring here and then coming back on-prem, that we have visibility and ensuring that, all the triggers are triggering as that data is going from the cloud environment back to on-prem. So those are a couple of items we're.
Oh, great. And so this is a question that I had expected to ask a little later, but since both you and David brought up the pandemic, curious to know the implications, mass telework has had on the trust policies, the zero trust policies. Luis, you spoke about the various access methods depending on where individuals may be. Also interested in understanding your perspective on it. I gotta imagine different organizations approach it differently, but it'd be good to see kind of what you have to say about that as well. So.
Sure. So we ended up, we nimbly adapted to the increased telework. We already had luckily my predecessors had prepared us for capacity. There was a snowstorm that occurred, I think it was in 2018, where we found out that we needed to increase our capacity to be able to support the workforce from a remote perspective. So that did help us being able to transition over to full-time telework for a majority of the enterprise. The other piece of it also was increased capacity to some of our data centers as well from a circuit perspective. But then also from the other thing that helped us was obviously the move to cloud services, right? We leveraged, the cloud services that we had rolled out for our business end, right, for the Office platform, and that definitely assisted us. And we had rolled out, tools like Teams, and everybody's using different tools like Zoom. There's multiple different tools that are out there that are available to support this, remote posture. But with that came risk, right? Figuring out, okay, well, how do we measure the risk, and what's the risk that we're now willing to take? And truth be told, I think that because of the situation, and I think even George can probably talk about it from a DoD perspective, I think organizations were willing to take on maybe a little bit more risk due to the current situation. But what we did is we did analyze and look at, what is our visibility right now that we're getting when people are on the network inside of the wire, if you will, versus when they are connected through a VPN or connected through something like a cloud security gateway. And we did the analysis and did validate that we do have visibility because we also have endpoint protection as well. We have the ability to see what's going on with the endpoint. The other thing from a security perspective is vulnerability management. How do you ensure that you're patching and making sure that your configurations are still secure? And then that comes into question of whether or not you're leveraging network scanners versus agent-based scanners. So those things all came into play as we were going down this journey.
So, Alex, a tale of two stories. The Dell Federal team was already 100% in telework mode. So we had built our own Dell Federal network and have been operating in remote mode for several years. It was fascinating to watch DoD and their transition, where you had 5% of the department previously teleworking to 95% very shortly after post-COVID. They made it an amazing transformation, and I would tell you they focused on expanding what they knew, which was their VPN capability, and it was very successful. But the areas that we really saw innovation were on the secure side, and on the SIPRNet side, where they really changed the paradigm and went after some new technology to enable workers to truly work from home on a secure network. So that was fascinating to watch.
Gotcha. George, I got to imagine you have something to add here.
A little bit. I mean, we're a lot like Luis. We're a pretty well established telework organization. So we really didn't skip a beat, when we went to massive telework. We are already, not my foresight, but my predecessor's foresight was smart enough to build out a telework capability for the entire organization, even though we never really used it. But it was prophetic now. But just like some of the cybersecurity aspects, where we use a VDI infrastructure with a mix of thick and thin clients, and thin clients, patching not a problem, but the thick clients, we're relying on the users to actually download and install those, has been a perennial problem with the telework, where we just got to keep nudging them to update. So. Right. That's been a bit of I won't say a security issue, but it'd be nice if everybody just was on a thin client VDI, and then we could just patch everybody at the same time.
The other thing that also was a great value was the update to the Trusted Internet Connection policy for the federal government 3.0 when it came out, and making risk-based decisions on the ability for you to go direct to a cloud service provider with some caveats, right? And that's what I mean as far as the analysis that we did, was looking at some of those cloud service providers, and can you go direct, and what is the risk there, and looking at what visibility you still have. So for example, if you're going to a SaaS tool for access that would normally come back into the data center, go out through the trusted internet connection, then up to the cloud, versus going direct, what visibility do we have on it that changes from inside the network versus them connecting it directly from the endpoint, versus through the VPN or not through the VPN, and we did validate that we do still have the same level of visibility, so that we can still respond to anything that was to come up.
Great. Hey, well, that brings up a question that I have for you about service providers. And this is probably more for Luis and for George, but when it comes to contracting agreements with cloud service providers, how do you address the security needs, and what mistakes do you often see if you don't?
It's a good question. It's a very good question.
I have a perspective too.
So the thing is that, so, and I think the same is for DoD, because they have obviously, clauses within the contracts, and there's requirements there. I mean, for us, for cloud services, the first question we always ask is going to be whether or not they have Fedramp. And the answers we get back vary, right? Because there's varying levels of Fedramp. But in addition to that, we do have clauses within the contracts that do address security, and it's around the data, right? As far as the data, where is it going to be at? How are you protecting the data? And then also ensuring that as we kind of work with those providers, making sure that they are, number one, they have to have the Fedramp, because if they don't have the Fedramp, and then there's more work that we have to do to ensure that they're meeting our security requirements. That's a topic that I think we can spend a lot of time on. Georgia, if you have anything to add on that.
No, I appreciate those insights. I guess we had a bit of an impedance mismatch between the folks who acquire our services and our security folks. Unfortunately, for some of our early endeavors, our security folks were brought in at the end, like even after the contract was awarded, and say, here, now, what do you think? Rather than getting them involved right from the get-go and writing of the contract. So we're learning over time, not without some pain.
Dave?
Yeah, so, there has been a constant drumbeat about managed service, and you hear it across all the departments that what we want is a managed service delivery. And unfortunately, the difficulty in writing that into a contract has produced very little true managed service delivery. And I happen to believe that cybersecurity as a service is going to be a growing capability set. So I would just offer to my government colleagues that our inability to articulate managed service, whether it's IaaS or PaaS, you name it, is going to bleed over into a managed service cybersecurity delivery model. So we need to figure out that we need to work with our acquisition professionals and figure out how we properly align that ask to delivery with respect to cybersecurity.
Gotcha. Thanks, David. Here's one for you. I think there's a lot of talk about securing applications, and there's questions about, do you secure the applications first, or do you secure the underlying cloud infrastructure first? Curious to know your thoughts on, what does it take to actually secure these applications in the cloud on a continuous basis? And if you have a recommendation or perspective on the sequence in which they are secured.
Well, the easy answer is very simple. In this new DevSecOps world, you build a cloud-native application. And the fundamental principles of DevSecOps allow you to truly bake security into that application. That is such a whole different world than what George is trying to do to move major ERPs into a public or government cloud environment. So the answer, Alex, is quite simple. And unfortunately, it's not easy when you're dealing with major ERPs. And that is, use modern DevSecOps principles. Build your security into your software, build a lightweight, portable software that can move quickly between the edge and the cloud. And, cybersecurity is simply part of that development process. Again, a little bit of a challenge when you're trying to determine whether to refactor a major ERP. Those principles simply don't apply. So I certainly understand the challenges, but our view is you look at this workload by workload and determine where you can do some refactoring to help address specifically cybersecurity challenges, whether that's adding new authentication features, adding encryption into the mix. That is a process that we start early on through an apps rationalization process to work with a customer to figure out what's the best path forward from an application and cybersecurity standpoint.
So thanks for that. Speaking of encryption, Luis, what role does encryption play in the way the DHS approaches security?
So encryption, I think, is key for cloud, obviously, because of the fact that you don't own or maintain it, right? That goes back again to the risk where before, when we ran our own data centers and we maintained the data center from the physical environment all the way up the stack, maybe there was less of a need for encryption inside of a data center. But as you're moving your workloads into a cloud environment, it is highly important that you encrypt that data in any form that it's going to be out there, whether it's going to be at rest, in transit, or even in use. And depending on what kind of cloud that you're leveraging, it could be a little bit more difficult to do. If you're leveraging IaaS, you can pretty much control a lot of the encryption capabilities there without too much of an impact in regards to performance, which is another reason I think that some folks don't do a lot of encryption, because you're obviously looking at performance for your application. But the SaaS is another piece where you also want to ensure that you do encryption. And a lot of the SaaSes do encrypt. It's just figuring out what type of methods they use. Are they using their own key that they issue out that you don't have control over, or is it a key that you can bring and provide to that software as a service? And then again, you have to look and figure out, if it's a software as a service, the performance should be optimized in order for you to be able to do that encryption. But if you're building out an application yourself, from an IaaS perspective, that you're sitting on top of your own infrastructure, the organization has to determine the best way to ensure that the encryption is being done. And again, it needs to be done not just in transit, but also at rest and also in use as well.
Gotcha. Thanks for that. Appreciate it. So a question for the group. I'm not steeped in security. I've dabbled in it, but I always recall one of the primary issues is understanding where the boundaries are and being able to secure those boundaries. With the boundaries now being nebulous, with data kind of being everywhere, it's within a cloud environment. What approaches do you take to ensure that security is able to adapt to protect the data?
Interesting you bring up boundaries, because from a federal perspective, most boundaries are referred to from a FISMA boundary, right, as far as what a system looks like. And to your point, how do you actually do the system boundary around the data versus around the system, right? Especially as you start going into microservices, as you start going into different constructs. And I think we're starting to look at that and figure out, okay, well, how about platforms? Let's look at how we're going to be doing the actual boundary around a particular platform. You brought up DevSecOps. DevSecOps, you want to look at the platform that you're using to build out the capability, right? But then you're still also needing to look at the data and figure out, okay, well, how do we fit the data into a boundary if it's being built with this platform, but now it's being used all over the place? I think it's going to be dependent on where the data fully ends up at. Is it staying in the cloud, or is it moving around? Because if it moves around, that's where the boundary gets a little bit fuzzy from a data perspective, right? And from a FISMA perspective. And I think right now, FISMA is obviously, again, looking at systems, but the way that we are defining systems is evolving and changing, especially with cloud.
Gotcha. George?
I have to echo that and say that's why we do encryption, because you get past that one layer, then the next layer is to steal the data. Hopefully it'll stay encrypted.
Gotcha. David?
Yeah, I would just say boundaries truly don't exist the way we traditionally looked at boundaries. I mean, they're having all of your users inside a network security boundary simply hasn't existed for many, many years. And we have to look from a zero trust standpoint at that whole journey of capabilities, all the way from the user to the analytics, as I laid out in the front. It's a combination of those technologies that deliver you a cybersecurity solution. When you trust no one and nothing in your enterprise, you have to secure every piece of that connection. As I said, people, data, and info systems, and you got to go after and authenticate everyone through multiple means. You have to protect your data through multiple means. I mean, we talked about encryption. There's obviously other ways, and ultimately secure all components of your information system, again, through multiple means. And that journey will continue for a long time.
Yeah, and I think that's been just the paradigm shift. 10 years ago, everybody's worried about securing the network, making sure the plumbing, and assuming a way that if you didn't get into the plumbing, the data's safe. And now we're making that, we're inverting that thinking and saying, well, no, let's assume you've gotten in. Now let's protect the data and not assume the network is safe.
Well, that's fair enough. Thank you for that. So George, interested in your perspective on the various security needs when you find yourself in a multi-cloud environment. And I'm not so sure if you guys are there just yet or are headed in that direction, but I think they will require some different and unique things.
Yeah, that could be a blessing and a curse, I guess. From the multi-cloud environment, it's good to have competition, get vendor lock, things like that. But every cloud is managed a little bit differently. Every agreement you have has different specifications. So trying to figure out how to optimize for each one and then going across could be problematic. So.
Gotcha. Well, great. We're about to come up on time. There is one question that I have, I think, for the broader group, and it's, when you think about the unique aspects, certainly from your various organizations, and we may not get time to get to this. If there is one thing that stands out with respect to DLA's needs and with respect to the DHS's needs, with respect to the way cloud is implemented, what would that be? The kind of the single most important point.
As far as I missed, I think the first part of that, as far as the way that we would like to see cloud implemented, is that the question?
Correct.
Or
the way that you'd like to see cloud implemented? Securely.
I think that's the answer that we all want, obviously, is a secure implementation. I think one thing that I always mention this on discussions. So from a monitoring and visibility perspective, one thing that I've seen is that from a software as a service perspective, there are some variations on the level of visibility that you get. I would like to be able to see more of a standardization of, okay, from a visibility perspective, this is what you get across across all your SaaSes. What you get from vendor A versus vendor B can vary widely. And you have less control over a SaaS, right, versus what you can do with the infrastructure as a service. So I think that would be one point I would make.
Okay, George, we're coming up on time, but if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'd say I have to agree exactly. I mean, the biggest rub that we have with cloud services is trying to understand who's responsible for what. What's the government responsible for? What's the cloud service provider responsible for? And sometimes, well, I wouldn't say sometimes, often we're surprised. And that's when you get into trouble.
Right. Well, gentlemen, thank you. This has been insightful. We really do appreciate your time. We hope we'll have an opportunity to interface with you again on some of these topics in the future. So with that, I'm going to prepare to pass the baton to my colleague, Melissa Harris, who will moderate the next panel, which is focused on streamlining the ATO for the cloud.
Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Alex, and to our panelists for kicking off a great discussion about cloud cybersecurity. I look forward to building off of the security angle in this fireside chat on streamlining the ATO for the cloud. And with that, I'd like to introduce our guest, Brian Conrad, who is Fedramp's Cybersecurity Program Manager. Brian joined the team in December of 2018 after serving for over 20 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, where he gained considerable experience in telecommunications, IT, acquisition, and project management. Now, Brian is considered a cloud computing and cybersecurity subject matter expert within the federal government. And at GSA, he leads multiple efforts associated with the Joint Authorization Board's assessment and authorization activities for cloud services across the government. Brian, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and we love getting out and talking about Fedramp.
Yeah, of course. So off the bat, what is it about cloud-based environments and applications that make them a unique cybersecurity challenge? And what practices do you promote at your organizations to help them overcome any challenges?
Sure. So Fedramp standardizes the security requirements for authorization and ongoing cybersecurity of cloud services. And so we provide we provide transparency into how the cloud service providers are addressing security issues. One of the biggest challenges is understanding that cloud is a shared security model. So when a cloud service offering gets a Fedramp authorization, it's getting a stamp of approval that it meets certain requirements. And I speak mostly from the JAB side, the Joint Authorization Board side. But, when agencies use these authorized cloud services, they have responsibilities as well. And so the agencies will always need to focus on their customer responsibilities in ensuring that those are implemented in order to maintain the security of the cloud system and the data that's inside. If it's implemented properly, there's a significant level of effort the industry holds when it comes to security. And excuse me, with the security model that cloud affords, it allows industries, and what we see is agencies reusing those Fedramp packages, the work that's been done by a cloud service to get a Fedramp authorization, and understanding the authorizing official may have additional requirements based on their unique agency mission. So again, the shared security model and the authorizing officials looking at different requirements that may affect their particular agency or mission.
Right. And the cyber risk landscape is ever changing rather frequently too. So authorizations have to adjust accordingly. Granting an ATO at one point in time may not mean that the IT infrastructure meets those requirements indefinitely. Is there a way to automate a continuous ATO process? Or how are you and how can other agencies continuously verify cloud infrastructure and applications as the threat landscape changes?
That's a great question, and that's something that we hear quite a bit. And fortunately, Fedramp post-authorization has a very robust continuous monitoring program. So at least, again, from my perspective in working with the cloud service providers that have JAB authorizations, there are monthly deliverables by the cloud service, and the JAB review teams actually produce one-page reports for agencies to use and to see, and so they get visibility on just how well the cloud service providers are doing in addressing vulnerabilities and taking actions to ensure that that their cloud services remain secure. And those are watched very closely by the Joint Authorization Board as well. So if we find cloud service providers that aren't necessarily keeping up with the Fedramp requirements, they're asked to do so, and we expect them to do so as part of having a Fedramp authorization. So they also, cloud service providers also have to complete an annual assessment on top of the monthly vulnerability scans, as well as we expect cloud service providers to report even suspected incidents that may occur within their boundary. These are some ways that we're trying to keep track of, and successfully keeping track of, the cybersecurity posture of those authorized cloud services.
Right. And similarly, cloud services, as you were sort of talking about how they have to check in with their posture, cloud services are constantly updating and evolving their applications and infrastructure. So one-time ATO may not cover potential or down the road security concerns, like a software update with malware attached to it. How can Fedramp help federal agencies mitigate this type of risk and stay on top of their threats?
Yeah, so again, this is all baked in kind of into the Fedramp program. Is we have, after a system receives a Fedramp authorization, we understand that it's probable that the security posture of the system could change over time due to changes in hardware, in the implementation of new software technology, or due to the discovery or provocation of exploits. Okay, so if the cloud service providers, being on top of their game, so to speak, see that these changes are coming, they can submit a significant change request and provide it to their authorizing official on the agency side, or to the JAB review teams on the JAB side. And so that agency authorizing official or the JAB can evaluate the changes, the significant change, the impact to how controls are implemented in things of that nature. So the ongoing assessment is done per se through our continuous monitoring, through the annual assessments, and then also the evaluation of these significant changes that cloud service providers make frequently. And there are quite a number that are made through the course of the year. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but our JAB review teams processed quite a few in the last year.
Gotcha. What specific challenges do you see agencies encountering in understanding and embracing Fedramp at all? Do you have any recommendations for how they can easily apply Fedramp authorized cloud capabilities in their enterprise?
Sure. So we're constantly seeing an improvement in the agency's understanding of the program. We focus a lot on outreach to ensure that that agencies understand, the Fedramp processes and policies and exactly what they should expect from the cloud service providers as well. And I think that's a huge thing to emphasize. So it's, we have expectations on the agency side of what they should be doing when they look at a cloud service, but we also want to make sure that the agencies understand what the cloud service providers should be providing to them. This protecting federal information is kind of a team sport, right? It's a collaborative effort between our cloud service providers, the PMO agencies, the Fedramp PMO agencies, and our third-party assessors. Everybody has different roles in that, but it's very important to understand, from an agency's perspective, what the cloud service providers should be doing. Also, as we look ahead, one of the things that the Fedramp PMO implemented over the summer was a voluntary program called the Agency Liaison Program. The goal is creating this program is to increase the collaboration, promote a unified understanding of Fedramp, and institute formal feedback channels within the agencies to the PMO. So essentially, agencies can volunteer to designate a person to be their Fedramp liaison. We kind of take the train the trainer mentality in that when we have training for the agency liaisons, there's an agency liaison listserv. And I'll get back to that in a sec. But it's a method for us to propagate information about Fedramp or things that are happening within the PMO with regards to policy process, that kind of thing, out to the agency liaisons, and they in turn turn that out to the members of their agency. So also, let's take Department of Education. If somebody in there has a question about Fedramp, they can go to their Fedramp agency liaison and answer. That would be sort of like the focal point of contact for that agency on all things Fedramp. And if they can't answer it, instead of getting 1,000 calls from the Department of Education, we get one call from their agency liaison, and it makes it a little easier to get information out too. So we're also, we kind of eliminate the game of telephone. I mentioned previously the agency liaison listserv. That has been very helpful when getting information out to agencies with regards to the 4 emergency directives that we've sent responses to over the course of this year so far. And so by all measure, the feedback that we're getting about the agency liaison program has been nothing but positive.
Yeah, that sounds like a great dynamic. And it definitely also makes it sound like it's a much easier process to incorporate Fedramp's authorization in cloud adoption across agencies. So just sort of piggybacking off of that, many people tend to be excited about adopting cloud solutions, but oftentimes they tend to think that security compliance can be a lift or something that can hold them back from adopting certain emerging technologies. So how do you hope to break this mindset? This liaison program sounds like a great starting point, but could it be changing the culture around security? Is it maybe a matter of ensuring acquisition of solutions with security baked in, or what are your thoughts?
So there is a lot of innovation coming out, and it's really cool that Fedramp is kind of sitting in the middle between, my apologies. Sitting in between the cloud service providers and the agencies, and then so we see the cloud service providers innovating, introducing new technology, and we see, on the other hand, the agencies, moving towards the cloud to adopt this technology. And with Fedramp serving as a bridge, once products go through this process, Fedramp provides the agencies, allows the agencies to quickly onboard and use these innovative services. So once a cloud service gets a Fedramp authorization, we have guides for reuse that are available on our website. So agencies can use those as kind of job aids to help understand what their responsibilities are in using an existing Fedramp authorization. We also understand, that collaboration with industry is key. Okay, and one example of that, and one that I've been involved with sort of deeply, is Fedramp is soon going to be releasing guidance on securing and scanning containers for use in the cloud. So this guidance, we originally authored it, and then we held a technical exchange meeting with cloud service providers who are actively using this technology, and got their feedback. So our document, the fidelity of our document, and the guidance it provides would be much better and much more relevant to the stakeholder community. In addition to that, we held a public comment period where we had the opportunity for our cloud service provider, or not just the cloud service providers, but the third-party assessors. And those are the folks that have to go out and actually assess this technology against Fedramp standards. It was really great to get all the feedback that we got from them. We almost got too much, and the challenge with writing policy for Fedramp is we have to understand the entire landscape. And so when I speak to cloud service providers specifically, I tell them that, our policy has to be broad, and I sort of call it guardrails on a road, akin to guardrails on a road. We want to keep everybody within the guardrails, but we understand that there's enough difference between technology implementation and the size of business in the service model, that we can't expect everybody to go up and down the center lane. So we have to intentionally keep our policy and our guidance and requirements broad enough to fit all of the, basically anybody from industry who wants to come into Fedramp inside.
Right. And I also just wanted to touch upon one of the big security matters of the year, and that's the mass move to telework. It's pushed agencies both to rely heavily on cloud-based capabilities, but it's also brought a bunch of new cybersecurity challenges. So beyond the usual obstacles you face in helping organizations secure their cloud environments, what have the conditions brought by telework done to change your cybersecurity challenges for your organization and the agencies you serve?
So you hit it right on the head, Melissa. The ability to work remotely and virtually in a secure environment is more important than ever. And where, that's where these authorized cloud services, we saw a sudden shift to go to cloud-based products and services. And that sudden growth in virtual work emphasized the value of cloud offerings, but also the importance of secure cloud offerings. And so we keep track of the number of authorized cloud services that are reused across the government. And as you can imagine, this year that number skyrocketed. Again, I don't have the specific numbers off the top of my head, but for obvious reasons, we saw the numbers of reuses skyrocket. And so through Fedramp, we enable the federal government to accelerate the adoption of cloud computing by creating those transparent security standards. So when somebody gets a Fedramp package, gets access to a Fedramp package, they can see exactly what that cloud service is doing. And if that cloud service has been authorized for a while, there's a way, agencies can look at the status and see how that cloud service has been performing, in their continuous monitoring and addressing vulnerabilities and such.
Excellent. So I think we can move on to a couple audience questions that are coming in. And the first one is, how do methodologies like DevSecOps impact how agencies can achieve FedRAMP compliance and support cloud strategies?
So that is something that, again, we deal mostly in authorizing commercial cloud service offerings. And as we see technology start to mature, we reach out to cloud services that are more skilled in that area, and also, be able to tap into that brain power to help us formulate policy. Again, I'll walk back to the example of the container security document. That was the initial draft was written by the cloud service, by the PMO, excuse me. But the success story in that is reaching out and collaborating with industry to understand best practices and see where we can formulate our policy to support the implementation of emerging technologies.
Great. And the next audience question is, how have you seen agencies use and reuse ATO since COVID-19 started? And has FedRAMP compliance held up?
Yeah, like I mentioned, the number of reuses we've seen over the year, especially started spiking around the March-April timeframe, as you can imagine. We've also, in the past 2 years, doubled the number of authorized products we have in our catalog. So in the first 6 years of FedRAMP, we got 100 authorized products, and in the past 2 years, we added another 100. And so that gives a very broad selection of all different service models available to agencies who may need to use that. Again, being cognizant of the need for that, we published an agency reuse guide that's available on our website. And of course, if there are any lingering questions or anything like that, folks can always reach out to info@fedramp.gov, and we're really responsive, and we'll make sure we get your question answered.
Right. And I just have one last question as we're running up on time, and that is, how can FedRAMP and the CDM program work together to maximize security for federal agencies that are moving to the cloud? Can you briefly discuss the ways in which these two programs complement each other?
I'm not very steeped in CDM. That's something I'm learning more and more about. But we have a professional on our staff who is looking at all things automation. And, that's one of the things that we're trying to do, is seeing where we can help provide visibility to agencies in a more broader sense on how the status of cloud service providers.
Great. Thank you for your insights, Brian. It's been a fantastic conversation, and thank you for all the work you do at FedRAMP.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. I'll now pass the baton over to Jeff Gerber, Government CIO's Senior Portfolio Director, as he kicks off our last panel, What Makes a Good Multi-Cloud Environment?
All right. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to all of our panelists and moderators who have already spoken today. This GCIO Cloud Summit has been extremely insightful for us who are planning or actively deploying scalable, secure cloud environments for our customers and products. Our next topic, as Melissa mentioned, is what makes a good multi-cloud environment, and we hope to maintain the momentum that the previous sessions have garnered. Migrating to the cloud requires hybrid multi-cloud software, platforms, and environments. And during the next panel discussion, we're going to explore how agencies are applying different elements to their cloud solutions to improve their organization's mission. To help me with the discussion today, we have some of the top federal government and industry thought leaders in the cloud space. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Dave Catanoso, the Director of Enterprise Cloud Solutions for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Secondly, we have Mr. Steve Grunch, the Branch Chief for Enterprise Cloud Services at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. And then lastly, representing an industry perspective on this panel, we have Mr. Jose Padin, Zscaler's U.S. Public Sector Director of Sales and Engineering. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining this afternoon. We really appreciate your time today.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
I'd like to start off with a business-oriented question before we talk more details about multi-cloud strategies and implementation. We can start with you, Mr. Catnoso, and then move to Mr. Grunch next. So the question is this: how has your cloud and multi-cloud strategy enabled your clients' products in supporting the organization's mission?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So yeah, the VA has, as you can imagine, a very large IT infrastructure. We're the second largest federal agency, and our cloud strategy started out from day one as a multi-cloud approach using Amazon and Azure. And so we've enabled our client teams or delivery teams to be able to go in and use the services from both of those providers to stand up and deliver services. We've got probably over 1,000 apps across our enterprise that at some point or another may or may not migrate to the cloud. And so we've enabled them to access both Amazon and Azure services, and then in some cases they've taken that to the next level and they're starting to containerize and refactor their applications, use microservices, and then we're looking at building a more comprehensive strategy on top of that.
Excellent. Same question for you, Mr. Grunch. How have you accelerated your organization's missions with cloud services?
Sure. So at USCIS, we've been in the cloud. We started with Amazon Web Services in 2014 and have progressed through the last 6 years to include a number of different services and applications within the AWS environment. And recently, within the last year or so, we started to move workloads into Azure as well. Most notably, the Office 365 suite is now running in Azure. We've made significant progress in getting the network connections between AWS and Azure and our own, our private network connected through ExpressRoute and Connect Direct. And we've also started to do some research and development work with some of the Google Cloud Compute services. To answer the question, though, there are three main areas which cloud has helped transform the business. The first one I would say is delivery. Using the cloud services, either AWS or Azure, we've been able to deliver new products. We've been able to deliver them at a faster pace and provide our customers which we would consider the beneficiaries of some of the immigration services. We've been able to provide them better products in a more timely way. The second piece of it is our deployment schedules. So using our DevOps frameworks and our tool chain and our business processes, we've been able to increase the way that we deploy software. We have many groups within USCIS that are doing daily production deployments using these methods. And the last piece I would say is transformation. About 2 years ago, in 2017, 2018, our new CTO began looking at a new way to design our applications and have commonality across different service components within the organization. And as part of our process of going to microservices, he developed or implemented domain-driven architecture or domain-driven design between the different services that we have within USCIS. All of those systems are running in the cloud. Most of them are using modern platforms like Kubernetes or Confluent, Kafka, etc., to do a lot of this work. And so the cloud has been instrumental in being able to deliver those services to the agency.
That's wonderful. So Dave and Steve definitely broke it down pretty well, Jose. Anything from an industry perspective that you're seeing that's really accelerated the organization's mission?
Yeah, and what's really interesting is to see the adoption of the cloud services across the government. So even if you rewind to 5 years ago, having conversations, people were still considering cloud services or just starting to move out. And really now what you've seen in, our leader from the Fedramp PMO was on earlier, the explosion of cloud services across the government. And what that really has pointed out to is just an area around security. So what we're seeing and at Zscaler, what we're doing is to be able to help extend that security down to the cloud. So now that, there's an aspect of application layer data that are on-prem, well, what happens when all of that moves out and is in the cloud? How do you get visibility into what your users are doing? How do you see where people are accessing? If you have an abstraction layer of the service and it's running on multiple clouds, how do you know what's happening from a security policy perspective within these clouds? So there's a lot of questions that get raised as infrastructure as a service is adopted more in the federal government, as software as a service is adopted more in the federal government. Now the question around security, compliance, and visibility come to play. And that's something that Zscaler has been able to help the federal government with, is to get that visibility and to add that security where the users and the data happen to be, which today is now in the cloud.
Excellent. So let's, Dave, can we pull on that thread a little bit more from the VA's expertise? So how have enterprise cloud service offerings matured for you all over the past couple of years to support multiple cloud strategies? And what do you see some of those key elements of the evolution being?
So we started our maturing our journey back in late 2017, early 2018 timeframe with the formation of our office and the establishment of the enterprise cloud. Right around that same time, our Exchange team managed to do one of the largest migrations of about 500,000 email accounts up to Office 365. So we really dove in really headfirst on the software as a service side first, and then we took a multi-cloud approach to standing up what we called launch pads or landing zones in Amazon and Azure to put that, as Steve mentioned, that basic plumbing in place, the network connectivity back and forth between the cloud networks and our on-prem networks, the basic security platform, ATO capability, leveraging security controls, some basic common tooling to give our delivery teams a place to land. And then we started migrating a series of applications up into those two clouds over time. And because of the nature of the applications, everyone took a slightly different approach. Some were more of a lift and shift. Other ones were a little more advanced and maybe started looking at containers and other things. But we gave them that flexibility to get some acceleration in the adoption of the cloud. And now we're maturing that to a more enterprise type approach. We're putting more enterprise tools in place to manage across those environments. We're putting some more standardization and governance tools in place. And we're also looking at adding a platform layer on top of that, which enable common containerization, orchestration, and ability to use a true multi-cloud, almost blur the line between our two cloud environments and our on-prem environment as well, so that we can really, for applications that are suitable for that, really take them to the next level.
That's great. Yeah, and I think we have some time reserved here in a few minutes to talk about what are some of those common tools and processes. But I'd like to hit on the same question with Steve before we proceed. So at USCIS, how have your enterprise cloud service offerings matured over the past couple of years? And how has that evolution looked for you?
Sure. So I think a big part of it is the maturity of the services that are offered by the CSPs. There's over the last couple of years, there have been more services that are what I would call managed services. For example, most clouds today, whether you're running in Google, Azure, or AWS, have a managed Kubernetes platform. And if you've ever managed a Kubernetes platform, there are difficulties in that. You spend a lot of time on day two operations trying to keep it up and monitoring it, etc. Trying to manage the control plane of the Kubernetes cluster. And so the maturity of those offerings has helped out pretty substantially in the way that we've used multi-cloud. The other thing that multi-cloud has done is offered us different platforms, if you will, for research and development. We engaged in a number of projects last year for artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we made some pretty significant insights using both Google and Amazon. the service offering within Amazon has actually been pretty beneficial for a number of our projects as well.
Great. Jose, anything to?
The other, I just want to touch on also the interconnectivity between the clouds. That has matured quite well as well. We are able to use we're able to use cloud connectivity through our partners to use ExpressRoute and Connect Direct, and then tie that back into our network, our private network. So we've made some improvements in how we go about doing that within the agency as well.
Great. Jose, any thoughts on the evolution from industry?
Yeah, and David and Steve hit on two great points. So, what we're really seeing is, if you think about the term multi-cloud, right? What does multi-cloud mean? I'm leveraging multiple clouds. Well, the flip of that is single cloud, right? And so what really happened is, as people were investigating leveraging cloud, especially infrastructure as a service, we kind of had this mindset that we had with traditional IT, which is, I'm going to buy endpoints. I'm going to go have all my vendors give me quotes, and I'm going to buy 500,000 endpoints, or I'm going to buy storage, and I'm going to standardize on one storage, or I'm going to buy servers, and I'm going to standardize on one server. So that mindset was what originally was brought into cloud as government was looking. But the realization of that is, why would you ever do that? Today, especially, Steve pointed out, there's amazing things that are going on and what you can do from an AI perspective in some of these clouds, where there's an advantage that you want to use for your agency. Other clouds may specialize in different technology, and there are other reasons why you want to use that. So really, the realization is, single cloud was never a real long-term strategy. Multi-cloud is the strategy for the government going forward. It's not really a debate. So being able to take that into consideration, look at technologies that can be able to prevent locking you in. There's a lot of ways that vendors are trying to bring you into cloud services only provided by one. But look at open API infrastructure. Look at the ability to support multiple different layers of infrastructure. Look at multiple layers of containerization and how you could support that, because multi-cloud is the way that the federal government will consume the cloud going forward.
Absolutely. Good points, gentlemen. So I think we've hit on a few of the common tools or processes to employ and promote multi-cloud environments. Are there any others, Dave, that you'd like to highlight?
Sure. So in addition to putting the container orchestration platform in place, we're also looking at things like governance tools, cost management tools. AI ops is a big trend in our organization to try to bring in automation of event and incident management, and alerting and monitoring is important. So those are all key areas that work. And of course, the security tools are key. I mean, we have maintained a Fedramp high environment in all of our clouds. And so it's critical to us to secure veteran data. So security tools and security monitoring, in addition to, third-party tools that we're using heavily to manage across the clouds. Within each cloud, we're using the cloud native tools that Steve mentioned. Both Amazon and Azure have a whole suite of native tools and services that they make available. Where it makes sense, we're leveraging those too. So each cloud is operating as it's designed to operate by the CSP.
Yeah, Steve, you mentioned a number of common tools and processes, AWS and Azure native tools for your AI work. Anything else you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, so I think if you want to do successful multi-cloud within an agency or even within a private company, there are a few processes that I think are critically important. One of them is centralized governance, right? You have a governing body, whether that's your enterprise architecture board, a technical review board. You have a centralized governing body that determines, which cloud environments you're going to use, how things are going to be procured, and those decisions are made from a central point. So the way that your agency is organized can help facilitate that, whether that's through your infrastructure division or whatever, the centralized governance is a big part of that. Along with the governance is also centralized procurement decisions. So the way that we did our cloud contracts here at USCIS, no matter what cloud that you decide to go to, all of the contracting and the procurement of those services are done through a single contract, at least on the infrastructure side. The labor side is a different, is organized much differently for different reasons, but we've centralized our ability to procure any cloud CSP from an infrastructure perspective, such as IaaS, through a single contract vehicle. The other pieces that that David was talking about, having having common DevOps platforms, a common tool set that is used across all of the clouds is also important. And then the cost, and then your ability to collect cost information across all three clouds has been critically important for us as well.
Thanks, Steve. Jose, anything to add on common tools and processes for multi-cloud?
Yeah, and a couple points. So if we think about what happens when you use multiple clouds, right? There, especially it looks like there's a lot of conversation around infrastructure as a service and applications here, right? So I have applications and they're leveraged in multiple different clouds. How do the users get access to that? So when we move up the stack to kind of the user being able to get access to the application, we need to think about that in our strategy. So there are ways that we can create access methods. And so one of those tools is a zero trust security platform that can allow users the ability to get access to the applications wherever they may be hosted, whether they're in, infrastructure as a service, AW, or on-prem, whatever it happens to be. That place that a user will always go to and connect into the application as it's defined in a zero trust perspective. And then on the back end of that system, you can define wherever that application wants to live. So it makes it easier for you to abstract the infrastructure where the applications are tiered from the user so that you can leverage multi-cloud. So if you want to move to a different cloud tomorrow, you can do that. The users don't have to be part of that migration plan. There doesn't have to be a communication that goes out to the user base saying, now here's how you get access to your app because we move something on the back end. We want to make that as seamless as possible and as secure as possible. So when you're moving up the stack and looking at the applications here, there's some tools to do that. And I think a zero trust security platform is critical in that. And then just when it comes down to some of the ways that we can look at the actual security of the users that are being applied across this, wherever they happen to be, there's ways that you can make sure that you get that visibility into what's happening as well, because that sometimes is a challenge or an area that's lost. If you have your tooling set up in one cloud to be able to see what's happening from an instrumentation perspective or from a security compliance perspective, it can sometimes be a challenge to move to other clouds. So looking at tools that create that ability to get visibility to security across clouds, that's a great thing to think about, and do it up front where it's not a bolt-on at the end after you get down into these application migrations and leveraging the multi-cloud up front.
Yeah, great points. So, I think we've all talked about how platforms, containerizations, and private clouds do play into the multi-cloud strategy. Obviously we wouldn't be on this session together if that weren't the case. And you've all exhibited some of those elements within your answers here today. But Steve, can you break it down into layman's terms? When you're talking to your CIO, how these all play together with each other.
So first, our strategy at USCIS is a container-first strategy. When we build new applications within the agency, or when we start transforming services, we're looking at doing that on a container platform. The way that multi-cloud has helped with that is that today, if we want to deploy a Kubernetes cluster to any of the cloud environments, all of the clouds providers make that pretty easy for us to do. If we want to manage Kubernetes cluster in any of them, we can stand it up. There are tools out there also that if we want to stand up, commercial clusters such as OpenShift or other products, we can do that pretty easily as well. And it gives us some pretty good capabilities, taking advantage of cost, of data locality, and then and also any specialized services that exist within those cloud environments. So it kind of goes back to we're using multi-cloud to deliver best-in-class products, expedited delivery back out to our customers, and transformation of these different business processes, and each cloud offers us capabilities to do that.
Dave, any input on this question?
Well, sure. I'll just double down on what Steve said. I mean, IT modernization and digital transformation are a big part of VA's strategy going forward, and our main focus is delivering innovative services and accelerating our rate of innovation to get services to veterans and our staff members that serve veterans directly. So we're taking advantage of all that these cloud platforms and even our on-prem infrastructure has to offer, whether it's cloud native services and more importantly, containerization is becoming a focus for that. And Steve already kind of covered how easy that's becoming, how easy it is to do these days with the different tools that are available. We're definitely moving that, and we're also moving in a DevSecOps direction where we're moving more agilely, or we're moving oriented to a product line management approach. We're making a lot of changes in parallel as part of our modernization effort, all focused around the goal of innovation and delivery of services to veterans and securing their data, of course. So that's really how I would explain it, or when we talk to our CIO and our senior leadership. We've been really blessed at the VA that we've had a great senior leadership team that's kind of set the strategy and has given us the air cover we need to move forward in the direction. And I think that's key to any organization that's trying to do that. In addition to the central organization that Steve mentioned, you need a good leadership team that's championing the event, because organizational change and technology change is difficult. And if you have good leadership and direction, it helps make it a little easier.
Absolutely. So Jose, you hit on two really good elements of platforms, containerization, private clouds, with regard to zero trust security and visibility across that. Any other main points you'd like to make?
Yeah, and again, this is great to see the federal government go down this path. CI/CD, continuous improvement, continuous development, is a strategy that helps us remain innovative. So the VA, driving towards innovation and adopting this methodology is critical. The one thing that we see happen, and I would recommend anyone looking, to go down this path from a containerization, is, first of all, yes, use containerization. It's a great technology. It's gonna create that abstraction from the infrastructure as a service, tons of flexibility. But misconfiguration of the container, this is where a lot of exploit happens. So if you think about from a Fedramp perspective, at Zscaler, we have 3 cloud services that have Fedramp. There's a lot that goes into making sure that our services are compliant and a third-party accreditation along that. But when the government rolls out infrastructure as a service, there's not always that same third-party accreditation and inspection of all the changes that are happening. So it's important to understand, one, that when you move to containerization, your security model is now dynamic. You will be making changes, and they will not be the same changes in a traditional world where you could go through 3-6 months of change management in order to do that. They're going to happen continuously. So how do you grasp that? You need to think about that up front. And there are tools and there are ways out there that can allow you to scan those environments to make sure that they're compliant with your needs, to make sure they're compliant from accreditation perspective, and that can give you that third-party validation that a misconfiguration in a CI/CD environment won't create an exploit for your agency. That's something that we want to try to avoid ahead of time. So it's really important to think about that as well as you're moving down that path. Not a reason not to, because the technology is well developed, right? the commercial and enterprise world are standardized around a lot of these tools. So bringing this into the federal government, allowing the federal government to reap the rewards of this innovation is critical. But think about it from a cloud security compliance perspective as well, and leverage that layer in those tools to be able to help the agencies move forward.
Yeah, all good points. So folks, we're coming to the last couple of minutes of our time on this session. I just wanted to ask one final question for our government panelists here. So, I know at Department of Veterans Affairs, we've been instilling the DevSecOps culture. And one of those tenets is really fail early, fail often, iterate, continue. So we've talked a lot about some of our successes here with our multi-cloud strategy, but we can start with you, Dave. Have there been any challenges your organization has faced when planning for and deploying this multi-cloud strategy, and how have you addressed them?
Sure. So you can imagine it's a very complex endeavor to try to move forward here. We had some challenges in the early days figuring out how to do the acquisitions and put the right infrastructure or acquisition structures in place to get the cloud capacity on contract, how to structure that versus the labor contracts that we have, and also we leverage our actual VA staff to do the work, right? And training, organizational change, all those things are difficult. I mean, some of the things we're dealing with now, we've kind of matured past that. I'd say some of the things we're looking at now as a challenge are how to really determine which applications are best suited for that modernization, containerization, really refactoring, and other ones that maybe are maybe just replatforming or maybe stay on-prem, right? Going through that rationalization of applications is the next level of maturity we're moving toward. I think that's probably one of the biggest things. Then determining where to host them, which platform particularly. We want to make that as transparent as possible, or not transparent to the customer. Then they shouldn't care where we host it. The IT team should be able to figure out where an application is hosted, and the customer should get great service. And it shouldn't really matter whether they're in a container environment, a regular cloud, or on-prem environment. It should really be good quality service regardless of where they're delivered from.
Absolutely. Same question to you, Steve.
Yeah, I think for us, so governance was a kind of a challenge for us in the beginning as we started to integrate more clouds into our environment. I think we have a pretty good handle on that now, but like has been mentioned in the call, having good leadership at the top from the CIO down, to the actual implementation, the team leads that run the implementation teams, kind of all binding together. Having good communication channels throughout the environment has helped tremendously in the governance area. And I would say the other area that we kind of experienced a challenge and we're able to get control of it was just spending money in the cloud. The different delivery teams come with different skill sets. When applications are moved to the cloud, they don't all migrate the same way. There's different migration strategies that occur. But at the end of the day, what we've learned is that you can't just migrate something to the cloud and say you're done, right? It is a continuous evolutionary process. Keep that thing running as efficiently as possible, and to continue to look at ways to make it operate more efficiently, no matter what cloud it's in. And I said the last piece, and this is still kind of a challenge for us, but whenever you go to select a cloud to run a workload, you really have to look at the data that's generated from that application and where that data is going to go once it's generated. If you have data let's say is bound to an application in Azure, and you have another application in AWS or back in your data center that needs to consume that data, you have data egress issues going on between the different cloud environments, and just being able to manage that, being able to determine where the best location for the data is and where the best location for the applications that are consume that data is really something that needs to be thought about ahead of time.
Great. Well, gentlemen, this has been a very enriching discussion. I thank you all three for such a great discussion, sharing your insights and successes and lessons learned for your multi-cloud strategies and deployment. Thank you so much again for your time today. At this point, I'm going to hand it back over to my government CIO colleague, Mike Hoffman, to help us wrap up the Cloud Summit.
All right. Thank you so much, Jeff. Great panel. And I want to thank all the speakers across all the panels for this morning. Excellent job. Really quite a bit of insightful points, a lot of the solutions that are coming across for these challenges. So really fantastic, and thank you very much. I also wanted to, before we wrap up, thank again our sponsors, Dell Technologies, as well as ServiceNow, Zscaler, and Cognosante. Thank you again for helping us make this morning possible. And we were lucky enough to hear from quite a few of you as part of these panels and the different solutions that you're providing as well. I want to remind everybody who is watching this afternoon that our next event is going to be December 3rd. It's going to be focused on disruptive DevSecOps. And our keynote for that one is going to be one of the key thought leaders in the space, Nicholas Shylon, who's the Chief Software Officer for the Air Force. So we're really excited to have that, so don't miss it. Get a chance on our website to register now for it, and you'll get all the information for it. One last reminder, I wanted to also promote our podcast. We have some great guests on there to include some of the folks who were on the panel who took part in today. We have our podcast on anywhere you get your podcasts, whether it be iTunes, Google Play, or what have you. And the different shows that we have are GovCast, Agile Advocate, Cybercast, and Healthcast. So plenty of different topics for you to cover there. So thanks again for everybody for joining us. And until next time, thank you.